Lesson 41 Use Imperative Handle. 1. Introduction. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to walk you through a less commonly used but powerful tool in React's arsenal, the hook called useImperativeHandle. This feature is designed for situations where you want to expose a controlled, custom handle to a parent component via a reference, instead of simply exposing a default underlying implementation. In other words, it lets a component decide what operations it allows the outside to perform, rather than exposing everything by default. In this first example, we're simply establishing the foundation needed to use useImperativeHandle. The parent component, parent, creates a ref using useRef, and passes it down to the child component as the ref prop. The child component, child, receives that ref thanks to forward ref, which is required whenever you want a function component to accept a ref from its parent. At this stage, the child isn't exposing anything custom yet, it's just showing the necessary wiring. 1. Parent creates a ref. 2. Parent passes the ref to the child. 3. Child is wrapped with forward ref so it can receive that ref. This setup is the basic structure needed before introducing useImperativeHandle in the next steps. 2. What it does and why it exists. At its core, useImperativeHandle allows a component to take an incoming reference, ref, and assign to it a custom object, rather than just letting the ref point to whatever internal element or value automatically. The reason this exists is that sometimes, as component authors, we want to limit or shape what the parent or external world can do with our component instance. Maybe we only want to expose certain methods, or hide internal details, or create an abstraction layer for external control. Without this hook, the parent would either get full access to the internals, which may be undesirable, or we'd have to build complex workarounds. In this second example, the child component uses useImperativeHandle to expose only specific functionality to the parent, in this case, a single method called focusInput. Internally, the child wraps an input element, but instead of exposing the entire DOM node and all of its methods, the child decides exactly what the parent is allowed to access. When the parent calls child ref, current, focusInput, the child runs its custom function and focuses the input. This demonstrates the purpose of useImperativeHandle. Control what the parent can do with the component. Avoid exposing internal implementation details. Offer only the methods you choose, creating a clean and safe API. Without this hook, the parent would gain full access to the input element, which might not be desirable. Here, the component explicitly defines what it wants to make available. 3. How it works conceptually. When you use this hook, the component receives a ref from its parent. Then, inside the component, you define a creator function that returns an object. This object is the handle you are exposing. It could contain arbitrary methods or values that the parent might invoke. Also, you specify a list of dependencies, reactive values, like state, props, or other functions, that the creator function uses internally. When any of these dependencies change, React will re-execute the creator and update the handle as necessary. One key point: the hook must be called at the top level of your component body, just like other hooks. The ref you pass in becomes tied to the object you returned, so the parent component using that ref now sees your object instead of the default. In the third example, useImperativeHandle returns a custom object that contains the exact methods the parent is allowed to use. Instead of giving the parent direct access to the input element, the child exposes a controlled handle with methods like clear, focus, and getValue. This illustrates how the hook works conceptually. The child receives a ref from the parent. Inside useImperativeHandle, the child returns an object that becomes the ref's value. The parent can now call only the methods defined in that object, nothing else. This lets the component fully control its public interface, hiding internal details and exposing only the actions it chooses. It's like giving the parent a custom remote controller instead of direct access to the entire component. 4. Use cases and examples of where it's appropriate. Let's talk about when it's appropriate to use this hook. One scenario is when your component wraps a native element or an underlying API, but you only want to expose specific methods to the outside. For example, you might wrap an input element but expose only a focus and scroll into view method, hiding all the other DOM methods. Another scenario is when you build a larger component that needs to provide an imperative action to the parent, for instance, a comment list component that exposes a method like scroll and focus add comment, which will scroll the list and focus the add comment field. In such cases, useImperativeHandle gives you a clean way to expose that method and nothing more. It enforces encapsulation and makes the API of your component clearer and more maintainable. 5. Important caveats and best practices. While powerful, this hook also demands care. First, you should not overuse imperative handles. One guiding principle in React is to prefer declarative props over refs for controlling behavior. If you can express something via props, for example, showing or hiding a modal via an isOpen prop, that is usually the preferred route. Imperative handles make sense when the action cannot be cleanly expressed via props, like native focus or scroll or a specific jump to behavior. Second, you must manage dependencies properly, because if you leave them out or misspecify them, you could end up with stale handles or unexpected behavior. Also, exposing too many internals via the handle defeats the point of encapsulation and may make maintenance harder. Finally, remember that from a version perspective, in newer versions of React the ref prop is more flexible, but prior versions required patterns like forwarding refs, so always check compatibility with the version you are using. 6. Summary and takeaway. To wrap up, useImperativeHandle is a hook that gives you control over how a component exposes functionality to its parent via refs. It's about defining a custom handle, an object with whatever methods or fields you choose, rather than exposing everything. It's best used when you need a controlled imperative interface for a component, and when the behavior cannot be expressed cleanly with props alone. Use it sparingly, document the interface you expose, manage dependencies carefully, and prefer declarative alternatives when possible.